It started with a splash. Not the kind of splash that usually signals a disaster, like a broken pipe or a rogue sprinkler. No, this one was light, rhythmic, and strangely soothing. Harvey Bloom rubbed his eyes as sunlight poured into the living room of his recently purchased Willowcrest home. The soft noise had been persistent for 10 minutes, and curiosity finally pulled him off the couch. With his coffee still brewing and his phone in hand, he shuffled barefoot toward the sliding glass doors that opened onto his backyard. What he saw nearly made him drop his phone. A family of ducks, 2 adults and at least 10 ducklings, were happily paddling around in his pool like they had been invited to a 5-star resort. One even swam in slow circles as if giving the others a guided tour. The absurdity of it all brought a slow grin to his face. Harvey grabbed his phone and started recording, whispering a commentary like a nature documentary. And here we see the majestic mallard, reclaiming suburban America, one chlorine bath at a time. Harvey uploaded the video to his social media with a sarcastic caption, "Duckbin BNB officially open." Amenities include a heated pool and judgmental HOA. Within an hour, the post had racked up thousands of views, mostly from friends and fellow photographers who found the whole thing hilarious. He had no idea that a harmless visit from some ducks would soon turn into an all-out war with the neighborhood's self-declared dictator. That dictator had a name, Denise Crabtree. She was the head of the Willowcrest HOA Compliance Committee, which, as Harvey would quickly learn, meant she was judge, jury, and executioner when it came to rules, real or imagined. Denise was the type of person who introduced herself by her full name, emphasized her title at least twice in conversation, and referred to her golden retriever as her emotional support supervisor. She wasn't just nosy, she was territorial. She showed up 2 hours after the ducks arrived, marching into Harvey's backyard like she owned the deed. No knock. No doorbell. Just a shrill voice cutting through the late morning calm. "You can't just let wild animals take over your property," she screeched, pointing at the ducklings as if they were criminals. Harvey, still in gym shorts and sipping from a chipped mug, blinked in disbelief. "They're ducks," he said flatly. Denise didn't even acknowledge the comment. She had a clipboard in hand and began furiously flipping through laminated pages. Section 8, Subsection C of the HOA Handbook clearly prohibits any resident from harboring livestock or allowing wildlife to nest within property lines. She snapped the book shut as if it was a mic drop. Harvey, amused but increasingly irritated, replied, "Well, unless you've got tiny duck-sized eviction papers, I don't think they're going anywhere." Denise's nostrils flared like a bull about to charge. "I will be reporting this. And if you think I won't call the authorities, think again," she snapped. Then, without another word, she stormed off, muttering about avian flu and neighborhood standards. Harvey chuckled and returned to his coffee, thinking the situation would end there. It didn't. An hour later, 2 police officers arrived at his door. Harvey opened it and instantly recognized the awkward expressions of people who knew they were dealing with nonsense but were obligated to pretend otherwise. "Mr. Bloom," one of them asked politely, "we got a call about ducks." Harvey invited them in, led them to the backyard, and gestured dramatically to the pool. The ducks were still enjoying their spontaneous spa day, completely unbothered. One even flapped its wings in what Harvey jokingly said was a salute. The officers snorted with laughter. "Yeah, this isn't exactly a criminal offense," one of them said after jotting something down in a notepad, probably just to look official in case Denise was watching. "You're not violating any actual laws. Wildlife happens." As they left, Harvey noticed Denise peeking out from behind her front curtains across the street. He gave her a big wave, which she ignored. That evening, he received a formal notice from the HOA in his mailbox. It accused him of enabling a public health hazard and threatened fines if the situation wasn't resolved within 48 hours. Harvey reread the letter twice, still baffled by the absurdity. He tossed it onto his kitchen counter and muttered to himself, "You want drama over ducks? Fine. I'll give you a show." By the next morning, Harvey had made the ducks the stars of the neighborhood. He printed out little name tags and stuck them on the fence behind the pool. One was named Denzel Quackington. Another, Quack Sparrow. He even created tiny floating rafts from foam boards and drew little sails on them. His backyard transformed from a tranquil suburban pool into a floating duck amusement park. The photos and videos went viral, again. But this time, it reached beyond his circle. Local wildlife pages shared his content. Animal lovers cheered him on. Even a few celebrities retweeted him. Harvey was stunned but also increasingly entertained. Meanwhile, Denise wasn't laughing. That afternoon, Harvey caught her photographing his backyard from her driveway. When he waved again, she snapped a shot angrily and stormed back inside. That evening, another letter appeared, this time accusing him of promoting unsanitary behavior and creating a digital disturbance to community order. Harvey nearly spit out his coffee reading that line. He posted it online with the caption, "Breaking, ducks cause digital disruption in peaceful suburb. More at 11. The post exploded. People started tagging their friends, adding captions like "Free the Willowcrest 12" and "Duck Lives Matter." Neighbors began to stop by, some bringing breadcrumbs, others just curious about the now famous duck pool. One elderly lady dropped off an inflatable yellow duck float, giggling like a teenager. Even kids from other blocks came to peek through the fence and take selfies. Harvey had unwittingly started a neighborhood movement, and Denise hated every second of it. But Harvey wasn't done. If Denise wanted to escalate, he would outmatch her in creativity. He contacted a local wildlife volunteer group to ask if the ducks were in any danger or needed assistance. To his surprise, one of the volunteers, a young woman named Maddie, said they'd been looking for the ducks after a nearby nesting site was bulldozed, by none other than the HOA landscaping project. That bit of information lit a fuse in Harvey's mind. Not only was he not the villain, he might actually be the only one trying to fix a problem the HOA created. The irony was almost too rich to handle. As the sun dipped below the houses of Willowcrest and the ducks huddled near the pool steps, Harvey sat on his patio with a notepad in hand. An idea had started to form. If Denise was worried about how visible his ducks were, he'd make them even more visible. Much more. But not with a protest. Not with another viral video. No, this called for something bigger. Something loud, hilarious, and unforgettable. Harvey smirked to himself as he wrote in bold letters across the top of the page, "The first annual Willowcrest Quack Parade." Harvey spent the next 2 days crafting his plan with the precision of a general preparing for battle, except his army was inflatable, feathered, and outrageously festive. The blueprint for the Willowcrest Quack Parade sprawled across his dining table, covered in sticky notes and sketches. Every ridiculous idea he'd ever joked about was now under serious consideration. He wanted floats. He wanted costumes. He wanted music. And above all, he wanted this to be loud enough that Denise Crabtree could hear every quack echoing inside her spotless living room. The community, still buzzing from the viral duck saga, responded to his call for help with overwhelming enthusiasm. Within hours of posting a casual thinking of hosting a little duck-themed event message on the neighborhood app, he had over 40 people volunteer to help. Some offered to build duck floats using wagons and cardboard. Others promised baked goods shaped like duck bills. A local college marching band even offered to show up for free. Apparently, they'd seen the viral video and wanted to be part of the now infamous duck resistance. Harvey hadn't realized how starved people were for something joyful and harmless. As preparations began, his backyard turned into a makeshift workshop. Retired neighbors brought tools. Teenagers crafted duck banners from old bedsheets. Kids designed duck face masks using paper plates and construction paper. One particularly eccentric neighbor, a guy named Ted who usually kept to himself, showed up wearing a bright yellow suit and declared himself master of quacktivities. Harvey wasn't sure what that meant, but he rolled with it. Meanwhile, Denise seethed from across the street. Each day, she stood on her porch, arms folded, phone in hand, taking photos and muttering to herself. When the flyers went out, bright yellow pages with cheerful ducks wearing sunglasses and party hats, Denise lost her last sliver of restraint. The next morning, Harvey found a thick envelope taped to his door. It was a cease and desist letter, allegedly from the HOA, accusing him of unauthorized event planning, misuse of community branding, and mocking the integrity of HOA operations through aquatic-themed satire. Harvey read it 3 times before bursting into laughter. He called his friend Megan, who was a paralegal, just to be sure. She confirmed that the letter was meaningless and clearly written by someone trying to sound legal without actually consulting a lawyer. Denise had overplayed her hand, and the neighborhood knew it. By that afternoon, someone had printed a dozen mock duck law violation tickets and started secretly taping them to Denise's mailbox. One read, "Crime, involuntary laughter due to excessive drama. Sentence, watch the parade and smile." Harvey had nothing to do with it, but he couldn't help admiring the creativity. The excitement reached local news outlets. A small-town TV station sent a reporter to interview Harvey in his backyard, where he stood in front of his duck-filled pool, wearing a captain's hat and holding a rubber duck like a trophy. The segment, which aired that evening, featured clips of the preparations and a short quote from Harvey saying, "It started with a few ducks. Now it's about community, fun, and telling people like Denise to chill out." Naturally, Denise saw the broadcast, and true to form, she called the station demanding a retraction. Instead, they posted the video on their social media page, and it quickly picked up steam. The internet now knew her as Karen of the Quack War. Harvey didn't post any insults, but his smirk in the interview spoke volumes. The comments flooded in. "Let the ducks live. Give that man a key to the city. Justice for Denzel Quackington." 2 days before the parade, Denise made a final, desperate attempt to shut it down. She submitted an emergency petition to the HOA board to ban any events not formally approved. But by then, the board had grown tired of her drama. Several members had kids involved in the parade. One board member, whose granddaughter was performing in the duck dance troupe, outright laughed at Denise's petition. The motion failed. With no support left, Denise resorted to her usual tactic, threatening to call the police. Harvey knew it was coming, so he took preemptive steps. He applied for a city event permit, even though it technically wasn't required since the parade would only occupy private yards and sidewalks. He also coordinated with a local animal rescue group to ensure the ducks were treated humanely and not stressed by the noise. They sent Maddie, the volunteer who had visited earlier, to supervise the ducks and educate guests about local wildlife. She was thrilled to help and even agreed to lead a Duck Safety 101 session before the parade started. As the sun set the night before the event, Harvey looked over his backyard, now transformed into a colorful staging area. Giant inflatable ducks bobbed in the pool, strings of lights hung from the fence, and duck-shaped cookies lined the tables. Neighbors wandered in, dropping off decorations and asking where to set up their booths. Harvey stood on a lawn chair, gave a short thank you speech, and ended with, "Tomorrow, we waddle for freedom." The crowd erupted in cheers and fake duck calls from plastic whistles. But of course, Denise had one last card to play. At precisely 10 o'clock that night, Harvey heard sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled up to his driveway. He sighed, already knowing who was behind it. The officers, the same ones who had responded to the original duck complaint, stepped out, barely hiding their grins. "We got a call about unauthorized poultry activity," one of them said, struggling to keep a straight face. Harvey invited them in, showed them the parade plans, the permit, the animal welfare coordination, and even offered them duck-themed donuts. After inspecting everything, they agreed there was no violation and stayed for a snack. One even asked if he could bring his daughter the next day. Harvey gave him a VIP duck mask and told him to arrive early. Denise stood across the street, watching everything unfold. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She just turned around and shut her front door. Harvey returned to his patio and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow was going to be a parade to remember, not just for the ducks, but for every person in Willowcrest who'd ever wanted to have fun without someone like Denise ruining it. It wasn't just about payback anymore. It was about reclaiming joy. It was about showing that laughter, creativity, and a few inflatable birds could beat bitterness and bureaucracy. As the inflatable ducks swayed gently in the night breeze and the string lights twinkled like stars, Harvey closed his eyes and smiled. The Quack parade was ready. Let the waddling begin. The morning of the parade arrived like a burst of color in an otherwise gray world. The sky was impossibly blue, the air fresh with the scent of spring, and the entire neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Harvey was already up by 6, sipping coffee as he took one final walk around his yard, which looked more like a fairground than a suburban lawn. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of preparation: duck-shaped balloons bobbing on string lines, tables covered in duck-themed cupcakes and lemonade stands, and neighbors adding finishing touches to their makeshift floats. The centerpiece of it all was a bright yellow banner strung across the street between 2 trees that read, "Welcome to the Willow Crest Quack Parade." Beneath it stood Harvey's pride and joy, a float made from his riding lawn mower, transformed into a miniature duck boat using plywood, pool noodles, and paint. He had even mounted speakers to it that played cheerful, old-timey marching music on a loop. By 8:30, people started arriving in waves. Parents ushered excited children dressed in beak masks and feather boas. Teenagers strolled through wearing yellow shirts with duck puns printed on them like "Quack is whack" and "Duck you very much." An elderly couple dressed as 2 oversized mallards waddled down the street arm in arm. Vendors set up booths offering duck-themed merchandise, local baked goods, and handmade crafts. One teenager had a face-painting store where kids could get little ducklings painted on their cheeks. Even the local fire department showed up with a modified truck featuring a giant duck inflatable on top and sirens that alternated between a honk and a quack. Harvey could hardly believe it. What had started as a petty HOA argument had become the most joyous event the neighborhood had seen in years. The parade officially kicked off at 9. Harvey led the procession on his duck float, waving to spectators like a small-town mayor during a 4th of July celebration. Behind him marched the college band in yellow uniforms, playing a medley of upbeat tunes modified to include duck sound effects. The crowd roared with laughter when they launched into an absurdly quacky rendition of "Stars and Stripes Forever." Behind the band came families pushing wagons turned into duck ponds, kids on scooters decorated with feathers, and a group of neighbors pulling a large inflatable duck on wheels like it was royalty. There was even a synchronized dance group called the Quackettes, 12 middle-aged women in matching duck pajamas doing a choreographed routine that had taken weeks of practice and was equal parts adorable and hilarious. Denise watched from her porch, arms folded tightly across her chest. She hadn't decorated her house, hadn't put out a single chair, hadn't even bothered to open both eyes fully. Her expression was one of pure, simmering disdain. But if she thought her sour attitude would dampen the energy, she was dead wrong. In fact, her presence only fueled the merriment. Whenever the parade passed her house, the crowd seemed to get louder, as if defiantly celebrating right in her face. A group of teenagers had even prepared a chant just for her block: "Don't be a duck downer, smile like you mean it." The entire crowd joined in, waving rubber ducks in the air and laughing heartily. Denise responded by snapping photos, probably imagining them as evidence for some imaginary court of duck law. But the highlight of the day came just before the grand finale. Maddie, the wildlife volunteer, had spent the morning keeping the actual ducks safe and calm in a shaded enclosure behind Harvey's fence. When she emerged with a small team of trained ducks, rescued birds accustomed to people, the crowd cheered. The ducks were released in a gentle, fenced-off lane along the sidewalk and waddled down in near-perfect formation. Their tiny feet slapped the pavement in rhythm as they passed signs reading "Honorary Citizens of Willow Crest" and "Official Quack Ambassadors." Maddie walked beside them holding a small baton like she was directing a marching band. At one point, the ducks paused, turned slightly, and waddled in a zigzag pattern that spelled out the word "peace" using pre-painted ground markers. It wasn't a trick or illusion. They had actually been trained to follow the layout. The crowd went wild. Harvey couldn't have been prouder. He had fought this war with laughter, and the victory had never felt so sweet. As the final float passed through, a giant rubber duck on a flatbed trailer with kids tossing out duck whistles like candy, confetti cannons fired from both ends of the street. Multicolored paper rained down as the band played one last silly tune, and the air buzzed with delight. The parade ended in Harvey's yard, where neighbors gathered for what they jokingly called the after-quack. Tables overflowed with snacks, drinks, and stories. People took pictures with the ducks, posed with Harvey's float, and traded rubber duck souvenirs. A local artist painted a mural on the side of Harvey's shed, depicting a duck standing proudly on a pool float holding a flag that said "Quack back." But it wasn't over for everyone. Just after noon, 2 officers appeared again, summoned, predictably, by Denise, who had called 911 claiming there was a riot of farm animals causing chaos. The officers arrived in good spirits, clearly aware of the situation before even stepping out of the car. One of them gave Harvey a thumbs up. The other, amused beyond belief, took a selfie with the giant duck float. Denise, red-faced and livid, attempted to argue that the parade had been a threat to public order. But the officers calmly told her the event had proper approval, followed city guidelines, and was in full cooperation with animal welfare groups. When she insisted the ducks were weaponized, the older officer replied, "The only thing dangerous about these ducks is how adorable they are." Defeated and humiliated, Denise turned and walked back into her house. It was the last time she would ever try to speak publicly about the parade. Her complaints, once considered gospel in the HOA board meetings, were now the subject of gentle jokes and polite shrugs. That evening, Harvey hosted a casual dinner on his patio for a few volunteers and neighbors. Laughter filled the yard, and the pool once again belonged to the ducks, who floated peacefully as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Maddie handed Harvey a framed certificate of appreciation from her rescue organization, thanking him for bringing joy and awareness to the community. As twilight settled over Willow Crest, Harvey sat with his feet in the pool, watching the ducks bob along the surface. He thought about how this all started, with one entitled woman trying to control what she couldn't stand, and one man choosing not to fight back with anger, but with creativity and humor. He looked around at the lantern-lit faces of his neighbors, the kids still playing with duck toys, the faint sound of a kazoo somewhere in the distance, and felt a rare kind of peace. Not just the quiet after a successful event, but the sense that something had shifted. The neighborhood had changed. It was freer now, lighter, more open. And it had taken a ridiculous little parade to make that happen. He smiled, leaned back in his chair, and whispered to no one in particular, "Quack attack successful." The week following the Willow Crest Quack parade felt like something out of a dream. The neighborhood had shifted. People were talking to each other more, smiling in the streets, waving at folks they'd only nodded at for years. A shared inside joke had cracked open something much deeper, a sense of unity that had been long buried under HOA meetings, noise complaints, and silent resentments. Harvey could hardly walk to his mailbox without being stopped for a cheerful chat, a thank you, or someone dropping off duck-themed trinkets. He had received everything from a crochet duck coaster to a hand-painted duck portrait from a local teenager. The ducks themselves had taken on almost mythical status in the community. Kids made up stories about them being guardians of the neighborhood. Some even claimed the ducks had their own HOA, which was far more forgiving and infinitely cuter. But while the ducks were floating peacefully in the pool and the neighbors were basking in the afterglow of the parade, Denise was anything but calm. For the first few days after the event, she remained completely silent. Her blinds stayed closed. Her porch light remained off. No walking her dog. No gardening in her prized flower beds. For someone who had once prided herself on inspecting everyone else's property from her own with a pair of binoculars, the silence was louder than a marching band. Harvey wondered if she was planning her next big move or if she'd simply accepted her defeat. But on Thursday morning, the answer came. A bold new flyer had appeared on the community bulletin board and in every mailbox. It was printed in an all-caps font with serious clip-art graphics of crossed-out ducks. The event was titled Feather-Free Friday and was described as a peaceful gathering of concerned residents who value order, cleanliness, and a duck-free environment. Denise had clearly tried to reclaim her voice, but the effort backfired spectacularly. People didn't just ignore the flyer, they turned it into a meme. One neighbor taped a rubber duck to the flyer and added a speech bubble that said, "Why are you so obsessed with me?" Another drew a cartoon of Denise being chased by ducks in sunglasses. Harvey saw it all and said nothing. He didn't need to. The neighborhood had found its voice, and it wasn't echoing hers anymore. When Friday came, only 2 people showed up to Denise's event, her husband, Ron, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and a confused Uber driver who had been handed a flyer at the gate and thought it was some kind of food truck gathering. Across the street, Harvey hosted an impromptu block party in his driveway, complete with a popcorn machine, lemonade stand, and duck-shaped cookies. The kids ran around in feathered headbands while adults lounged in lawn chairs, sipping iced tea and playing duck-themed bingo. The whole scene unfolded directly in front of Denise's house. It was the calmest, happiest form of poetic justice anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, Harvey's online presence had grown significantly. His duck content was now part of a larger theme on his photography blog, Suburban Wildlife Chronicles. He wasn't just documenting the ducks anymore. He had begun highlighting local wildlife displaced by urban development, bringing attention to how neighborhoods like Willow Crest could better coexist with nature. His posts were shared by environmental blogs and small news outlets, and he was even invited to speak at a regional wildlife conservation seminar. His story, once dismissed as a petty feud, had become a symbol of grassroots activism with a sense of humor. One afternoon, Maddie visited again. She carried a manila envelope and a big smile. She handed Harvey the envelope and explained that her organization was awarding him honorary membership and had named him their Community Wildcare Ally of the Year. Inside was a framed certificate, a letter of appreciation, and a small wooden plaque shaped like a duck. They sat together in the backyard, watching the ducks paddle peacefully. She told him about other neighborhoods struggling with similar issues and how his story had inspired them to approach things differently, less bureaucracy, more empathy, more creativity. As the days passed and the ducks began showing signs of preparing to migrate, a bittersweet energy took over. The ducklings were now full-sized, more confident, flapping their wings and testing short flights around the yard. Maddie explained that they'd soon move on, maybe settle near the larger ponds just outside town. Harvey felt a strange tug in his chest. He'd grown used to their presence, their gentle noise, their silly habits. They'd been the spark of change, the peacemakers, the unexpected heroes of an otherwise ordinary suburban chapter. So, Harvey did what he always did when emotions ran high. He planned an event. A farewell party, this time. A low-key evening gathering, just neighbors and family, no parades or costumes, just a tribute to the ducks who brought them all together. That Friday night, as the sun dipped below the roofs of Willow Crest, neighbors gathered one more time. There were fairy lights strung along the fence, picnic blankets laid out across the lawn, and calm music playing from a small speaker. The pool was calm, the ducks floating serenely as people came by to say their silent goodbyes. Harvey gave a short speech, nothing fancy. He thanked the ducks, the community, and even, in a strange way, Denise, because without her tantrum, none of this might have happened. Then, as a symbolic send-off, the children released a cluster of duck-shaped helium balloons into the sky, each with a message tied to its string. Some wrote thank yous. Others drew pictures. A few just wrote good luck in big bubble letters. They watched the balloons float higher and higher until they disappeared into the fading orange sky. That night, Harvey sat alone by the pool long after everyone had gone home. He dipped his feet in the water, listened to the soft sounds of the ducks settling in for the night, and reflected on the chaos and joy that had passed through his backyard like a seasonal storm. He thought about how fragile peace had seemed in the beginning, when a single HOA member's anger had threatened to unravel everything. But peace had arrived anyway, in feathers and ripples, through laughter and community effort. By Sunday morning, the ducks were gone. Harvey woke up, poured his coffee, and went out to the yard to find the pool still, the surface undisturbed. No feathers. No splashes. Just sunlight dancing on the water. It felt emptier, but not in a sad way. Like the last note of a favorite song echoing in your ears after it ends. He nodded to himself, quietly whispering, "Safe travels, my friends." Weeks later, the HOA board held its annual elections. Denise ran again, of course, with a campaign centered on restoring order and standards. She lost. By a lot. The new board president, a soft-spoken neighbor named Patrick, won on a platform of inclusion, humor, and compassion. His first act was to revise the HOA bylaws to support small wildlife habitats and promote community events that celebrated nature and togetherness. Harvey was asked to serve as event coordinator, which he accepted with a wink and a reminder that he refused to wear a tie.